Okay, so this is number 2 in my series of recordings for you, brief recordings on various aspects of writing your rapport de stage. So the second one is about your title and how to articulate it and how to construct aims and objectives which are going to represent that title, no more, no less, and how to make them good, solid, doable, understandable. Okay, so the first thing, the articulation of the title. Well, I don't want to see anything that's descriptive. Description is for kids in the seconde, where they can describe in infinite detail something that they've read without adding anything to it. Here, you're supposed to be looking at a particular issue, a question to solve, perhaps, a problem to resolve, or maybe a hypothesis that you want to test. Those things lead to analysis, evaluation, conclusions that you can draw, and recommendations that you can make. In other words, it goes like that towards an endpoint, which is what we need you to produce. So, articulation of a title. A question that you're going to answer is usually a good one. Perhaps an even better one is a problem that you've discovered that the company has that you are going to set out to solve. The third one, a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that you set out to test whether it is true or whether it isn't. What you don't do is to set out to prove your statement, because you become unbalanced when you do that. So, question to answer, problem to solve, hypothesis to test would be a good way of articulating. If you read your title and it's just descriptive, what the company did about its new strategy, that's just description. That's no earthly use to you or to us. Why? Because it tells us nothing new. It adds nothing to the sum total of knowledge in the universe, your knowledge, or for the company. If it adds nothing, well, how can the company improve? How can it move forward? So let's imagine that you've got your title sorted out in that kind of way. The next thing you need to do is to try to think of aims and objectives. In other words, breaking down your title into what I call bite-sized chunks that you can then address. I mean, I love steak. You can probably tell by my waistline, but I couldn't eat a whole one without cutting it up into bite sizes. You have to do the same with your research. So I'm suggesting that you do between 3 and 7 aims and objectives. Less than 3 is 2. It's massive. Each one of those is gigantic. You can't swallow that. More than 7, 8, or 9, it's a solid petite miette. They're too small to deal with. So somewhere between 3 and 7 aims and objectives. Now, what do you want these aims and objectives to be? Number 1, to cover the whole of your title. Nothing more than your title and nothing less than your title. If it's more, you're wasting your time. If it's less, we're wondering, where's this stuff that you promised me? And we're marking you down. Secondly, you need to lay out these objectives, aims and objectives, in a logical kind of way. Chronological, if you're looking at and analyzing a process, where does that process start? Where does it end? Maybe you could go through it in chronological steps. In most research, we tend to start with the general, and then we move towards the more specific. So you start up here with what we all know, and you eventually drill down to what no one knows. You might know an awful lot about marketing generally, but about social networks used by international female fashion shops within France, in Alsace, in Mulhouse. You might not have any information about that at all. So in other words, you start from the general, you move to the specific. And what is obvious is that when you look in the literature, what is already written, we call that secondary research. It's not primary because you are the prime and you haven't done that research. We look at the secondary research, also called a literature review, to be able to work out, what do we know about this thing? Well, that's what we're going to go on to later. But what else do we need to do in the way we lay these aims and objectives out? I strongly suggest that you do not lose them in narrative paragraphs. I suggest that you do them as bullet points. You write a short sentence that explains what it is, and I would recommend that you start that sentence the word to. Research is an active thing. It's stuff you're going to do. To examine the extent to which So start your aims and objectives off with to. Right at the end, one that you will all do, of course, is to make recommendations to my employer in the light of this research in order to improve its performance. There will be something like that coming at the end. So try to start your aims and objectives with to, and imagine yourself doing something. Next thing, these objectives need to be completely clear. I don't want to read them, neither do my colleagues, if they are unclear. If we look and we go, what does he mean by that? What does she mean by this? You have to look at every word. So yes, a bullet point with a number of words, and then explain what this is and why you're doing it. Then bullet point, highlight, bold, your next objective. But as I said, it's got to be clear and it's got to be discrete. What do I mean by that? Separate, not overlapping. So I don't want to read objective 2 and think, yeah, that's okay. And then read objective 4. And I look at it, I think that's just another way of saying objective 2. You've got to look at all of these things. So they need to be discrete, they need to be clear, they need to be evident, and they need to add up to 100% of your title, not 80%, not 150%. So you need to establish those aims and objectives clearly for a very important reason. And it's this: first impressions are lasting impressions. Imagine yourself, you've spent ages getting yourself in your best dress or your best suit to go to a nightclub to impress. You don't get a second chance to do that. You know, you've spent ages getting ready, having your fingers done, your nails done, your hair done, a new dress, whatever it happens to be. It has to be just right. It's the same for us. We are looking at you. You are giving us something, and we are making you're forming an impression. When you form an impression, those impressions are very strong. If I read your title and I go, yee, I'm not exactly convinced about that. That sounds descriptive, not analytical. I look at your aims and objectives and they seem unclear, jumbled up, and I don't think they add up to your title. By the end of that, I'm thinking the student is confused. And if he or she is confused at the beginning, it's not going to get any better by the end. It's inevitably just going to get worse. These problems will magnify themselves. Now, once you form that impression in the first 2 pages, it's very difficult to convince a marker to change his mind. It's human nature. Sometimes we're surprised and think, yeah, actually, this is better than I thought it was going to be. But if you start off being unclear yourself and you're not being clear to us, we are worried about what we're going to find when we turn the page and what we're eventually going to get to at the end. So, title, aims and objectives, absolutely critical. I strongly recommend that when you've thought of a topic, you make it into the title the way that I've suggested, and that you write, as I've suggested, a bullet point, aim and objective with a little explanation underneath it, and then another one and another one, another one. And you invite your prof referent, your tutor, to comment on that. Are they happy with it? Do they think it's doable? Is it too big and unfocused? Does it need narrowing it down? This is one of the places where we can give you good advice. But if you don't give us enough information and you just say, can I do something on search engine optimization in the company I'm working for? Well, obviously we're going to say, yeah, probably, but as you haven't told us what it is that you actually want to do, we can give you zero advice. So give us the tools and we will do the job. What are the tools? It's the detail. It's a well-articulated title and it's well-conceived aims and objectives. You give us that and we will be able to help you and hopefully give you confidence. Yep, that's great. I know exactly what you're doing. You're very clear about it. Right, push ahead, get on with it. That's what we need to be able to say. But if you don't give us that detail, we really can't help you. Okay, so it's critically important you get the title and the aims and objectives right. Okay, thanks. Now going to finish this one and go on to the next one, which is going to be about the introduction, which clearly will explain the title and the aims and objectives and do a few other things as well. Okay, bye for now.